Chapter 20. 19th October. Julian has not spoken to me for 2 days. He has not left the island. His belongings are still in the cottage. His books still stacked on the table. His coat still hanging by the door. A different coat. He took the other. He takes his meals at the Anchor, according to Moira, who told me this with the careful neutrality of a woman who knows something has happened and has decided not to ask. Meg and Thomas, his assistants, have been moving between us like diplomats, between warring nations. Thomas brings me data from the ambient temperature monitors with his eyes on the floor, and Meg collects Julian's correspondence from the cottage postbox with the brisk, deliberate cheer of someone navigating a minefield. I am not miserable. I refuse to be miserable. Misery is an unproductive state, and I have work to do, and so I have spent the past 2 days doing my work with a focus and intensity that I suspect an outside observer might describe as frantic, but that I prefer to characterize as rigorous. I have documented 14 common spectres in and around the village of Dunmore. Not grey walkers, the lesser spirits, the quiet dead who linger at the edges of the mortal world without the Warden's power or purpose. I have catalogued them by type, location, apparent era of origin, and observable behavior, and I present the findings here for the record and for the Compendium. I lost my spectacles twice during the survey, once in the kirkyard, where I found them balanced on a headstone I do not remember placing them on, and once in the harbor, where Bram had knocked them off the mooring post. I am beginning to suspect my spectacles have an independent life that operates on principles I have not yet classified. At the harbor, there are 3. An old man who sits on the seawall and stares at the horizon. Deceased fisherman, estimated early 19th century, class 5 passive spectre, no interaction with the living. A woman who walks the length of the pier and back, endlessly, wringing her hands. Class 4, repetitive spectre, appears to be locked in a behavioral loop associated with a traumatic event, and something that is not quite a person but more a shape, a smudge of gray that hovers near the mooring posts on foggy mornings and smells of tar and rope, unclassified. I have provisionally designated it a residual impression, a spectral remnant too degraded for full manifestation. At the kirk, 2 spectres, a minister who stands at the pulpit and appears to be delivering a sermon that no one can hear. Class 4 repetitive, late 18th century, notable for the clarity of his form. He is one of the most visually coherent spectres I have observed on Ara, and a child who sits on the stone wall outside and kicks their feet and laughs. The child's laughter is audible. I have heard it on 2 occasions. It is a small, delighted sound, and it is, I think, the loneliest thing I have encountered in my career. And I have encountered a great deal of loneliness in this line of work. In the fields, between the village and the moor, I have counted 7 more. Farmers, shepherds, a woman carrying water, a man leading a horse that is also spectral. They go about their business as though the world they inhabit is still theirs, and in a sense it is. The land remembers them. They are part of its pattern, woven into the soil and the weather and the long memory of the place. At the ruined chapel of St. Bride, there are 2 more, though I hesitate to classify them. They stand at the altar, or where the altar was, and they are not translucent as common spectres are translucent. They are dark, gray, but a deep gray, the gray of thunderclouds, and they do not move. They stand and they watch, and when I entered the chapel on Tuesday afternoon, they both turned their heads toward me in unison, and I felt not the cold of spectral proximity, which I am accustomed to, but something else, a pressure, a weight, as though the air itself had thickened around them and was pushing against my chest. I did not stay long, all of which is to say, the spectral population of Dunmore is considerably larger and more varied than the existing literature suggests, and the activity is increasing. This is not opinion, this is measurement. My ambient temperature readings show a consistent downward trend over the past 3 weeks, a drop of 0.7 degrees on average across all monitoring sites, with localized drops of up to 4 degrees at the Standing Stones, the Sea Caves, and the ruined chapel. The salt luminescence tests are showing elevated readings at sites that were previously inert, and the villagers are noticing. Fogs at odd times. That is the phrase I keep hearing. From Moira, from Angus, from Iona, from the fishermen at the harbor. Fogs that roll in from the sea at midday, or that form on the moor without a breath of wind, or that hang in the hollows at dawn and do not lift until well past noon. Fogs that smell of copper and age. Fogs that have, according to more than one witness, shapes in them. Old Kate told me, when I visited her at the Anchor on Wednesday, that this happens when the Warden is restless. He's like the sea, she said, settled in her chair by the fire with her whiskey, and her sharp eyes, and the air of a woman who has seen too much and found it all faintly ridiculous. When he's quiet, you forget he's there. When he's restless, the whole island feels it. What makes him restless? Wanting. He wants something, or someone. She looked at me over the rim of her glass. You know who he wants, lass. I know. And you're still here. I'm still here. Aye. She took a drink. You're either very brave or very stubborn. My grandmother would have said it's the same thing. Your grandmother sounds like a sensible woman. My grandmother walked into the sea caves at midnight on her 70th birthday and dared the Warden to come out and fight her. She was not sensible. She was magnificent. Kate smiled, the thin, fierce smile of someone remembering a person who was larger than the world that held them. He didn't come out, mind. The Warden doesn't fight, he waits. He's the most patient thing on this island, and this island has sheep, so that's saying something. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in 2 days, and the sound of it surprised me. It came out rusty, unused, like a door opening on hinges that needed oil. Where's your man? Kate asked. He's not my man. Your colleague, then. Your tall, cold one with the beautiful hands. I had not noticed Julian's hands. This is a lie. I had noticed Julian's hands. They are long-fingered and elegant, and he uses them when he talks, shaping the air, conducting his own sentences. They are also, as I have established, ice-cold and capable of leaving white handprints on human skin. But I did not share this with old Kate. We've had a disagreement, I said. I heard. Moira says the two of you have been circling each other like cats that have had a falling out. Moira talks too much. Moira talks exactly enough. It's you that talks too little. She leaned forward. Whatever you said to him, fix it. You'll need him before this is done. I said something unkind. Then say something kind. It's not complicated, lass. People aren't spectres. You can't classify them and file them away. Sometimes you have to just open your mouth and say the thing. This is, I suspect, excellent advice. It is also exactly the kind of advice I am least equipped to follow, because opening my mouth and saying the thing is precisely what got me into this situation. The thing I said was cruel and true, and it landed exactly where I aimed it, and now I have to unaim it, and I do not know how to unaim a truth. Hamish boarded up my window today, not the kitchen window, the small window in the back room, the room I use as a study, where my desk is, where the Compendium manuscript sits in its leather case, and Bram sleeps on the chair that used to be Julian's. Hamish came in the afternoon, without announcement, carrying a plank and a hammer and nails, and the expression of a man who is doing something he does not want to explain. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Boarding the window." "I can see that. Why?" He drove a nail in 2, 3 strokes. Hamish does not waste effort. Annie McCrae's been seeing things at her windows at night. Shapes, faces. Annie is a seer. She's always been sensitive too. She's not the only one. He drove another nail. Kenna saw something at her window last night, and Iona, and the Muir boy said he saw a face at his bedroom window, and the Muir boy is 12 and not given to fancies. I watched him work. He was efficient and thorough, as he is with everything. The nails driven straight, the plank fitted tight. When he was done, the window was sealed, and the room was darker, and the wall where the window had been was a blank expanse of wood and stone. "Is it the Grey Walkers?" I asked. "I don't know what it is. I know the fogs are getting worse, and the nights are getting strange, and I won't have—" He stopped, set down the hammer. When he looked at me, his face was the face of a man who has lost something to the thing that is pressing against the windows, and who will not lose another. "I won't have anything coming through the glass." "Hamish, do you think it's because of me?" "I think it's because of whatever's been stirring on this island since summer, and I think your poking about hasn't helped. And I think it doesn't matter whose fault it is because it's happening." He picked up the hammer. "I've boarded Moira's windows too, and I've told the men at the harbor to do the same." That seems extreme. When Elspeth..." He stopped. His jaw worked, fighting something that wanted to come out. "When Elspeth started seeing things at the windows, I did nothing. I told her it was her imagination. I told her to stop looking. He met my eyes. I won't make that mistake twice." He left. I sat in my study with the boarded window and the diminished light and thought about Hamish, who had lost his wife to the thing that was now pressing against the glass, and who was responding the only way he knew how, with wood and nails and the blunt physical assertion that the boundary between inside and outside could be held with carpentry. It cannot, of course. Wood does not stop spectres. Neither does glass or stone or any physical barrier. The grey world does not recognize walls. But I did not say this to Hamish, because the boarding of the window was not, I think, really about the window. It was about doing something, about having a hammer and nails and a problem, and the ability, however temporary, however illusory, to drive one into the other and feel that something had been secured. I understand this impulse. I have my own version of it. When the world becomes unmanageable, I write. I classify. I catalog. I impose order through taxonomy. It is the same impulse, the human need to make the frightening thing smaller by giving it a name and putting it in a box. Hamish uses a hammer. I use a pen. Neither is sufficient. Both are necessary. The music came again last night. I was in bed, or rather I was in bed with a book and a lamp and Bram, who was taking up approximately 2/3 of the available space, and who responded to my attempts to reclaim pillow territory by going limp and heavy. A feline speciality, that deliberate bonelessness that communicates. Moving is not an option. I heard it just after midnight, not loudly, not the overwhelming tide of sound that I had experienced on the moor. This was quieter, closer, as though the music were not out on the moor, but here, in the village, in the air outside my window, my boarded window, my Hamish sealed, nail-studded window that was supposed to keep things out. It came through the wood as though the wood were not there. The same music, the same deep, resonant, below-hearing sound that I felt in my teeth and my ribs and the soles of my feet. The same offer, the same question. Will you come? I lay in bed and listened, and the listening was itself a struggle, not because the music was compelling me. It was not. The compulsion, as I have established, is a myth. What the music does is want, and wanting is worse. But because part of me wanted to get up, to go to the door, to walk out into the night and follow the sound to its source. Part of me wanted to understand. Part of me wanted to stop being the woman who classifies and catalogs and imposes order, and to become, instead, the woman who walks into the gray world and sees everything, knows everything, is consumed by the knowing, and does not care. I did not get up. I stayed in bed. I held Bram, who growled low in his throat at the music, a rumble of feline displeasure that vibrated against my chest, and I waited, and the music faded, slowly, as dawn fades starlight. Not by overpowering it, but by making it unnecessary. When it was gone, I lay in the dark and breathed and thought about Julian, who was somewhere on this island, sleeping or not sleeping, breathing or not breathing, and I thought, he was right. It is getting closer, and I cannot fight it alone. The thought sat in my chest like a stone, not because it was frightening, though it was, but because it was an admission, and I am not a woman who makes admissions easily. I am a woman who has built her life around self-sufficiency, around the principle that if you do not need anyone, no one can disappoint you. And if no one can disappoint you, the only variable you must manage is yourself, and managing yourself is, well, it is not easy, but it is at least within your area of competence. Julian is not within my area of competence. Julian is outside every area of competence I have ever mapped, and I have heard him, and the music is getting closer, and the warden is restless, and I am alone in a boarded-up cottage on a dark island with a cat and a manuscript, and the growing unwelcome certainty that I have made a terrible mistake, not about the field work, about the thing I said in the kitchen, about the look on his face when I said it, about the door that closed quietly and the silence that followed. Tomorrow I will find Julian. I will say something. I do not know what. Kate is right. I cannot classify this and file it away. I will have to open my mouth and say the thing, whatever the thing is, and hope that it lands somewhere softer than the last thing I said. But tonight, the music and the dark and Bram's warmth against my ribs and the sound of the sea and the boarded window that keeps nothing out. Notes. Note 2. The classification of degraded spectral remnants remains one of the more contentious areas of thanatological taxonomy, Hargreaves groups them with common spectres. Marchetti insists they are a separate category entirely, arguing that a remnant is to a spectre what a fossil is to an organism, not the thing itself, but the trace it left behind. I find myself, unusually, in agreement with Marchetti. A residual impression does not think, does not act, does not respond to stimuli. It is a stain on the fabric of the world, nothing more. But it is a stain that tells us something about the shape of what made it, and that makes it worth recording. Chapter 21. 20th October. Julian came back to the cottage this morning. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. He did not offer an explanation or an apology, or any of the social preamble that normally accompanies the return of a person who has been absent for 2 days, following a conversation in which one party said something unforgivable and the other party left quietly, which is worse than leaving loudly, as I have established. What he did was this. He came in through the kitchen door at 7:30, while I was sitting at the table staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, and pretending to read a monograph on spectral taxonomy that I had already read twice, and that was not, in any case, very good. He came in, and he set down his satchel, and he went to the stove, and he made tea. Badly, as always, with too much milk and not enough steeping time, producing a beverage that was closer to warm milk with pretensions than to actual tea. And he set a cup in front of me without a word. Then he sat down across from me, picked up my Compendium manuscript from the stack where it lives at the end of the table, opened it to the section on spectral hierarchies, and began reading. After a few minutes, he took a pencil from behind his ear. He keeps them there, the way other men keep cigarettes, and made a notation in the margin. I watched him do this. I watched his hand move across my manuscript, which I do not let anyone touch, which I have spent 8 years building word by word, and which contains everything I am as a scholar and most of what I am as a person. I watched Julian Ashworth, who I had wounded with the most precise cruelty I was capable of, sit down at my table and pick up my life's work and begin, quietly, to make it better. His gaze stayed on the manuscript. He was giving me something that I did not know how to name until later, when I thought about it in the dark, with Bram on my chest and the wind off the sea. He was giving me the option of pretending that nothing had happened. He was building a bridge back to the normal rhythm of our days. The reading, the notes, the companionable silence, and he was letting me choose whether to walk across it. I walked across it. Your handwriting is illegible, I said. My handwriting is elegant. Your handwriting belongs in a pharmacist's prescription, not in the margins of a scholarly manuscript. This from a woman whose footnotes require a magnifying glass. My footnotes are perfectly legible to anyone with functional eyesight. Clara, your footnote 17 is written in a hand so small that I initially mistook it for an ink stain. I opened my mouth to retort, and something happened that I had not expected. The retort dissolved, and in its place came a feeling that rose up through my chest and lodged in my throat like a stone, except that it was not a stone. It was the opposite of a stone. It was something soft and raw and cracked open, and I had to take off my spectacles and clean them on my sleeve, which I do when I need a moment and do not wish to explain why. And I had to look down at the table because my eyes were doing something that I refused to acknowledge. and that I certainly was not going to permit in front of Julian Ashworth at 7:30 in the morning. "Julian," I said, to the table. "Hmm?" "I am sorry for what I said." A pause. The scratch of his pencil stopped. I kept my eyes on the table. "I know," he said quietly. "It was cruel, and I used something against you that you had trusted me with, and that is..." I stopped. "I am not good at this. I am good at taxonomy. I am good at footnotes. I am good at the precise classification of spectral phenomena along a 17-point matrix of my own design. I am not good at saying the things that matter when they need to be said, and the gap between what I feel and what I can express is, at moments like this, a chasm that I do not know how to cross." "It was unforgivable," I said. "I am asking you to forgive it anyway." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the wind outside, and the fire in the stove, and Bram cleaning himself on the coal scuttle with the noisy thoroughness that he brings to all acts of personal grooming. "Clara," his voice was very even, "look at me." I looked at him. His face was, not the mask, not the careful, charming, composed Julian face that he wears for the world. Something underneath that. Something tired and honest and old. "You said a true thing in a cruel way," he said. "I have spent 6 years surrounded by people who say kind things in dishonest ways. I find I prefer your version. It is not an absolution, no, but it is..." He turned the pencil between his fingers, a restless movement that I have come to recognize as the physical expression of an internal discomfort that he cannot otherwise show. "I have been dead for 6 years, and in that time, you are the only person who has looked at me and seen it, not suspected, not theorized, seen. And the fact that you used it against me in an argument does not change the fact that you saw, Clara. And that is not nothing." I had no answer for this. I am recording it here because I think it is important, though I am not certain what it is important for. It is important as certain observations are important in the field. You write them down not because you understand them, but because you know, instinctively, that they are part of a pattern that you cannot yet see, and that the pattern will emerge later if you are patient, if you keep writing. Your section on spectral hierarchies has a structural problem, Julian said, returning to the manuscript with the air of a man who has said enough true things for one morning and would like to return to the safer ground of academic criticism. "You've organized by morphological type, but the gray walkers won't fit that framework. They cross categories." "I know. I've been trying to resolve it. You need a secondary axis, classification by behavior as well as form. I've considered that. The matrix becomes unwieldy. Only if you insist on fitting everything into a single table. Use a branching taxonomy instead. Morphological type as the primary division, behavioral profile as the secondary." He sketched something in the margin, quickly, confidently, as he does everything. When he turned the page toward me, I saw that he had drawn a taxonomic tree that solved a problem I had been wrestling with for 3 months. It was, I must admit, rather good. "This would require restructuring chapters 4 through 7, I said. "It would improve chapters 4 through 7. "It would require restructuring chapters 4 through 7, and it would improve them. Both things can be true." He smiled. Not the full Julian smile, not the performance, the dazzle, the thing he deploys on strangers and barmaids and university administrators. a smaller smile, crooked, slightly uncertain, a real one. We worked. We worked through the morning and into the afternoon, and the silence between us was the good silence. The silence that is not empty, but full, that has texture and weight. The silence of two minds engaged with the same problem from different angles. Julian's mind works differently from mine. Where I am methodical, he is intuitive. Where I build systems, he leaps between ideas like a man crossing a stream on stones that he is choosing mid-jump. It is maddening. It is also, and I write this grudgingly, effective. My compendium is better for his interference, and he knows it, and the fact that he knows it and does not gloat about it is, I think, the closest thing to humility that Julian Ashworth is capable of. At noon, I found a letter from Nell among the correspondence that Moira had brought from the post office. 2 weeks old, as island post always is. Nell writes as she speaks, in fragments, with underlinings, and with a cheerful disregard for punctuation that would give a grammarian palpitations. She wanted to know if I was eating properly, if Bram was behaving, if that awful man, by which she means Julian, had arrived yet, and if I had discovered anything thrilling. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, and thought, you have no idea. Bram, for his part, spent the morning migrating from the coal scuttle to the manuscript stack to Julian's lap, a progression that I observed with the attentiveness of a field researcher documenting an animal's territorial behavior. Bram does not sit on the laps of people he dislikes. He did not sit on Hamish's lap when Hamish attempted it in the first week, delivering instead a swipe that drew blood, and that Hamish accepted with the equanimity of a man accustomed to the company of hostile animals. He has never sat on Moira's lap, though he tolerates her scratching the spot behind his left ear. He has sat on Thomas's lap exactly once, during a thunderstorm, and Thomas looked so alarmed by the honour that Bram took offence and did not repeat the experiment. But Julian's lap, Julian's cold, dead, spectral energy-sustained lap, is apparently acceptable. Bram settled there at noon and remained until 2:30, purring with a volume and conviction that struck me as excessive, and Julian rested one hand on Bram's back while he read, absently, without thinking, the gesture of someone fond of an animal, and I sat across the table and felt something that I am not going to write down, because there is a limit to the number of emotions I am willing to commit to paper in a single journal entry, and I have already exceeded it. Moira came in the late afternoon. She knocked. Moira always knocks, a courtesy that I appreciate more than I have told her, and when I opened the door she was standing on the step with a bundle in her arms wrapped in sacking cloth. Her expression was the expression of a woman on an errand she does not relish. "Miss Lennox," she said, "I've brought you something. Come in. Tea?" "No, She glanced past me into the kitchen and saw Julian at the table, and something in her face shifted. Relief, I think, or the absence of a worry. She had known about our quarrel, of course. The entire village had known about our quarrel. Villages are like that. Information travels through them by diffusion, requiring no effort and permitting no secrets. "Dr. Ashworth," she said, "good to see you back." "Mrs. Drummond." Julian inclined his head with the easy grace that he brings to all social interactions, and that I do not possess and have given up envying. "How is the porridge today?" "Terrible, I expect. I've not made it yet." She set the bundle on the table and unwrapped it, and inside was a collection of objects that I recognized immediately, rowan branches, a bundle of dried heather tied with red thread, and wrapped separately in a cloth that Moira handled with a care that caught my attention, a handful of iron nails, old ones, square-headed, blackened with age, rough-forged, the kind that would have been made by a village smith a century ago, or 2 centuries, the kind that existed before mass manufacture, each one slightly different, each one bearing the marks of the hand that made it. "For your windows and doors," Moira said. "My grandmother's remedy. Rowan over the lintel, heather at the threshold, and iron nails at the 4 corners of each window frame." She paused. "I know you're a scholar, Miss Lennox, and I know you've your own methods, but the nights are getting strange, and my grandmother knew things that aren't in books, and I'd rather you had the protections and didn't need them than needed them and didn't have them. Moira, I looked at the nails, at the rowan, at the heather, at the face of this woman who had come to my door with folk magic, bundled in sacking cloth, because she was worried about me, because she had heard the fogs and seen the shapes, and decided in the practical, no-nonsense way that Moira approaches everything, that something needed to be done. Thank you. You'll put them up? I'll put them up. Tonight. Tonight? She nodded, satisfied. Kenna appeared at the gate behind her, with another bundle of rowan. Moira's sister-in-law, cool and competent, who nodded at me without warmth and at Julian without interest, which I suspect annoyed him more than hostility would have. They had gathered enough rowan for the whole village, Moira said. Everyone was taking precautions. Then she looked at Julian, and her expression changed, became careful, evaluating, Moira thinking something she has not yet decided to say. You too, Dr. Ashworth. The same protections. Rowan, heather, iron. Julian's face did not move. It held its shape the way a frozen pond holds, still on the surface, with everything happening underneath, in the dark, where the water has not yet stopped. I'll manage without the iron, I think, he said, lightly, easily, with the exact inflection of a man expressing a mild preference, and not a man declining to handle a substance that would burn blisters into his skin. Moira looked at him. I looked at him. Bram, who was still on his lap, yawned enormously, revealing a pink cavern of mouth and the self-satisfied expression of a cat who has no problems and cannot imagine why anyone would. The rowan and heather will do well enough, I said, stepping into the silence with the deftness of someone plugging a gap in a dike. Julian has a sensitivity to iron. A sensitivity, Moira repeated. An allergy of sorts. An allergy. She looked from me to Julian and back again, and in her eyes I saw something that was not surprise but recognition, the look of a woman who has been putting pieces together for weeks and has just found the piece that completes the picture. Moira is not a fool. Moira is, in fact, one of the most perceptive people I have met, and I say this as someone whose professional life consists of observing things that other people cannot see. She did not press the point. She gathered the iron nails back into their cloth wrapping and tucked them into her apron. I'll keep these then, for the other cottages. She turned to go, then stopped in the doorway. Miss Lennox, the Muir boy says the shapes at his window have faces now. Whatever you're going to do it soon. She left. The door closed behind her. The kitchen was quiet except for the fire and the wind and Bram's purring, which continued with the serene indifference of an animal who does not care about iron or spectres. or the fact that the man whose lap he was occupying was technically dead. Julian looked at the rowan branches on the table. Then he looked at me. "She knows," he said. "She suspects. Clara. She knows. Then she is a woman of unusual perception, and you should stop underestimating the people on this island." He laughed. A short, surprised sound, not his usual laugh. Genuine. "You're right. I should." He picked up a rowan branch and turned it between his fingers. "I'll hang these tonight. The rowan and the heather, at least. You hang the iron. I'll hang the iron." "And Clara?" "Yes?" He was looking at the rowan branch. His expression was the one he wears when he is about to say something real, stripped of performance, bare as a winter tree. "Don't go to the standing stones alone. Not tonight. Not any night. Promise me." "Julian, promise me." I should have argued. Under normal circumstances, I would have argued. I would have pointed out that I am a grown woman and a trained scholar, and that I have been conducting solitary field work in dangerous conditions since before he was dead, and that I do not require his permission or his protection or his concern. Under normal circumstances, I would have said all of this, and he would have said something charming and infuriating, and we would have reached no agreement, and I would have gone to the standing stones anyway. But I looked at his face, and I thought about the 2 days of silence, and the door closing quietly, and the thing I had said that I could not take back, and I thought, this is not about the standing stones. This is about something else. This is about a man who has been dead for 6 years, asking a living woman to stay alive, and the asking is costing him something that I cannot see but can feel, not in the senses but in the body, in the bones, in the place where weather registers before the mind has words for it. "I promise," I said. He nodded, once, and returned to the manuscript, and the pencil moved in the margin, and the fire crackled, and outside, the first fog of the evening was rolling in from the moor, gray and thick and smelling of copper and thyme. Chapter 22. 22nd October. I broke my promise. I am recording this not with pride, but with the cold, clear-eyed honesty that the Compendium demands of its author, and that I demand of myself, even, especially, when the truth is unflattering. I went to the standing stones at midnight, alone, against Julian's explicit request, against Moira's warnings, against old Kate's accumulated wisdom, against every rational principle that I have spent my career cultivating. I went because the alternative was lying in bed, with the knowledge that the Warden was waiting, and the boundary was thinning, and the answer to every question I have spent 8 years asking was on the other side of a door that I could open, and the not opening was driving me to a particular kind of madness that I recognized from long experience, the madness of the scholar who knows that the data exists and cannot bear to leave it uncollected. I am not defending this. I am explaining it, which is a different thing, though I acknowledge that the difference may be invisible to anyone who is not me. The night was clear, startlingly so, after days of fog and cloud. The stars were the hard, cold stars of late October in the north, the kind that look less like lights in the sky and more like puncture wounds in something dark, letting through the brightness of whatever is behind it. No moon, no wind. The air was still and sharp and tasted of frost, though frost had not yet come. I left the cottage at 11:40. Bram was asleep at the foot of my bed. Julian was. I did not check. His room was dark, his door closed, and I moved through the kitchen as quietly as I could, which was not very quietly, because the kitchen floor has a board that creaks no matter where you step, and because I knocked my hip against the table in the dark and had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from swearing. I took my satchel, field notebook, pencil, thermometer, salt, the spectrometric lantern, a flask of tea. I did not take iron. I considered it and decided against it. Iron is an aggressive deterrent, and I was not going to the Standing Stones to deter anything. I was going to make contact. You do not begin a negotiation by arriving armed. This was, I acknowledge in retrospect, an error in judgment. It was one of several. The walk from the cottage to the Standing Stones takes approximately 40 minutes by the path that skirts the edge of the moor. At night, without a lantern, I used only the spectrometric lamp, which emits a low blue light that does not disturb spectral phenomena. The walk takes longer. The ground is uneven, tussocked, treacherous with hidden hollows and watercourses that look, in the dark, exactly like solid ground until your foot goes through. I turned my ankle twice. The second time I sat on a rock and cursed very thoroughly and wondered, not for the first time, whether a tenured chair at Edinburgh was worth the physical indignities of field work. It is. It always is. The chair is everything. The compendium is everything. I have not spent 8 years of my life cataloging every known species of spectral phenomena, from the common cold spot to the Class 9 manifestations at Verdun, in order to stop 3 chapters short of completion because the moor is muddy and my ankle hurts. I reached the Standing Stones at 20 minutes past midnight. They were different at night. I had visited them before in daylight and at dusk, and each time they had been impressive. 12 stones arranged in a rough circle on the crest of a hill, the tallest twice my height, the smallest at my shoulder, all of them gray granite veined with quartz that caught the light like embedded ice. By day, they were beautiful. At dusk, they were atmospheric. At midnight, under stars and without moon, they were nothing I had ever seen. They were a door. I could feel it, not see it, not yet. But the air between the stones was different from the air outside them. It was colder, denser, and it had a quality that I can only describe as attention, as though the space itself were aware of me, as though the stones were not markers but pupils, and I was standing in the center of an enormous eye. I set my satchel down. I took out the thermometer, 2.1 degrees Celsius inside the circle, 7.3 outside, a differential of 5.2 degrees. This was, by a significant margin, the largest reading I had recorded. I noted it. I set out salt. A line, not a circle. I have found that spectres respond better to offerings presented as a threshold than as a barrier. I lit the spectrometric lamp and set it at the base of the tallest stone, where it cast its blue light upward, illuminating the quartz veins until the stone itself seemed to glow. Then I sat down on the cold ground, cross-legged, with my notebook on my knee and my pencil in my hand, and I waited. I did not wait long. It began at the edges. The air between the stones rippled, not visibly, not as heat ripples above a road, but as something I felt against my skin, a distortion, a wrongness, as though the fabric of the world were being pulled taut from behind. The temperature dropped. My thermometer, which I had left propped against a stone, fell steadily. 1.8, 1.5, 1.2, below freezing, and still falling. My breath fogged. The salt line began to glow, not the faint baseline luminescence I was accustomed to, but a bright, steady white light, as though the salt were burning. And then the boundary opened. I have described it before. The flickering, the overlay, the moments when the grey world shows through the mortal world, like a palimpsest showing through a later manuscript. This was not that. This was the real thing. The veil between worlds did not flicker. It parted, slowly, smoothly, the way a curtain parts when drawn by an unseen hand, and behind it was the grey world, not overlaid on the real one, but replacing it, filling the circle of stones with a landscape that was the same and entirely different. The moor was there, the same hill, the same stones, the same shape of land, but the colour was gone. Everything was grey, not a single flat grey, 1,000 greys, a vocabulary of greys that I did not know existed. The pale grey of mist, the dark grey of deep water, the silver grey of old ice, the blue grey of a winter sky just before snow. The heather was grey, the grass was grey, the sky was a vast, depthless grey that had no stars and no moon and no end, and it pressed down on the landscape with a weight that I could feel in my chest, as though the air itself were heavier here, denser, thick with the accumulated weight of the dead. I stood up. I had not decided to stand up. My body did it, drawn forward as a compass needle is drawn north, not by will, but by orientation. I was facing the grey world. The boundary was open. The air between the worlds was cold and still, and full of that terrible attentive quality, and something in me, the part that hears the music, the part that sees the grey world when others see only fog, that part of me stepped forward. I do not remember crossing the threshold. I remember being on one side, and then being on the other, with no sensation of movement in between. No step, no transition, no sense of passing through. One moment I was in the mortal world, kneeling on cold ground with a notebook. The next I was standing in the grey world, and the mortal world was behind me, visible through the parting in the veil, like a bright room seen through a window, and it was already dimming. The grey world. I am going to describe it now as clearly and completely as I can, because that is what I came here to do, and because the description is the most important thing I will ever write, and because the act of describing it is the only thing that kept me tethered to myself while I was there. The ground beneath my feet was solid. This surprised me. I had expected something ghostly, insubstantial, the consistency of fog or dream. But the earth was hard and cold and real, and when I knelt and touched it, it felt like earth, gritty, damp, smelling of stone and age. The difference was in the color, which was grey, and in the temperature, which was bitterly cold, not the cold of winter, which has variation, which moves and breathes and relents, but a uniform, absolute cold, the cold of a place where the sun has never been and never will be. The standing stones were here too, but they were different. In the mortal world, they are granite, rough-hewn, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Here they were smooth, polished, black, or so dark a grey as to be indistinguishable from black, and they gave off no reflection. The spectrometric lamp, which I realized I was still holding, cast light that the stones absorbed without return, as though they were made of something that ate light and gave nothing back. The moor stretched away in all directions, grey and featureless and vast. But it was not empty. There were figures, dozens of them, scores. They moved across the landscape in patterns that I could not immediately parse, drifting, circling, converging, and separating in movements that suggested ritual or migration or something I had no framework for. They were the gray walkers. I recognized them from the distant observations Julian and I had made from the hollow. The tall, translucent forms, the slow, deliberate movement. But up close, they were different. They were more solid, more real. Each one was distinct. Men, women, old, young, dressed in clothing from every era I could identify. Rough homespun, Victorian suits, medieval cloaks, fishermen's jerseys. The dead of Ara, stretching back centuries, all of them here, all of them walking, all of them gray. None of them looked at me. They moved around me as a stream moves around a stone, acknowledging my presence without attending to it, as though I were a feature of the landscape, interesting but irrelevant. I began to take notes. My hands were shaking, from the cold, from the fear, from the extraordinary, overwhelming reality of being in a place that I had spent my career studying from the outside, and that was now, irrevocably, around me. But I took notes. I am a scholar. I observe, I record. Whatever else happens to me, I write it down. I was on my third page of observations when the Warden came. He did not arrive. He was simply there, the way a thought is suddenly there. Not approaching, not coalescing, but present, standing before me as though he had been standing there all along, and I had only just noticed. He was tall, taller than Julian, taller than any man I have seen, and his height was not the height of a large person, but the height of a thing that is decided to be tall, as though his dimensions were a choice rather than a fact. He wore a gray cloak, not a color of gray that I could name, but a gray that contained all the other grays, that shifted and moved like smoke, that was both solid and not solid, both fabric and weather. His face. I need to be precise about his face, because precision is what I have, and because the face is the thing I keep coming back to when I close my eyes, the thing that will not settle into a single image, but shifts and rearranges like a reflection in disturbed water. He was young, he was old, he was both simultaneously and neither conclusively. His features were strong, high cheekbones, a jaw that might have been carved, eyes that were the gray of the sky above us, that deep, depthless, starless gray. But they moved, flickered. One moment I was looking at a man of 30, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with a face that might have been handsome if it had not been so utterly still. The next I was looking at an old man, ancient, the skin drawn tight over bones that were too prominent, the eyes sunk deep, the mouth a thin line, and then young again, and then something between the two, and then something that was neither, that was just the face of the Warden, whatever that meant, whatever that was, a face that refused to be fixed. "Clara Lennox," he said. His voice. The voice was the worst part. It was the music I had been hearing for weeks, the deep, resonant, below-hearing sound that I felt in my teeth and my ribs, but shaped into speech, structured, directed at me. It was not a loud voice. It was the quietest sound I've ever heard, and it filled the entire gray world. "You know my name," I said. My own voice sounded small and thin, and very, very alive in this dead place. "I know everything that crosses my threshold. Your name, your purpose, the book you carry in your bag, and the questions you carry in your mind. He tilted his head. The movement was wrong, too slow, as though the air were thicker around him, and he had to move through it. You are a cataloger, a collector of names and categories. You wish to put me in your book. I wish to understand you. The book is where the understanding goes. Understanding, he tasted the word. Yes, that is what you want. It is what all your kind want, the walkers, the seers, the ones who stand at the edge and look in. Understanding, knowledge, the shape of the thing laid bare. My kind? Threshold walkers, the living who can see the dead. You are not the first. You will not be the last. He moved, not walked, moved, a displacement rather than a locomotion, and he was closer, not threateningly close, but close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from him, a cold that made the ambient temperature of the gray world seem mild by comparison. The woman before you, Elspeth, she wanted understanding too. What happened to Elspeth? She understood. He said it simply, without malice, without cruelty. The way you might say the tide came in or the snow fell. A fact, an inevitability. She understood so thoroughly that she could not leave. The knowing held her. It holds them all in the end. Is she here? She is here. They are all here. Every walker who has crossed my threshold and stayed. He gestured, a sweep of his shifting hand, and for a moment the gray world sharpened, and I could see them, not just the gray figures moving across the moor, but others, standing still, standing at the edges, standing in the hollows and the shadows and the spaces between the stones. Dozens of them, hundreds, 1,000 years of threshold walkers, all of them here, all of them gray, all of them still. I felt something then that I am going to call fear, though the word is inadequate. Fear is what you feel when a dog barks, or a carriage comes too close, or a letter arrives from the faculty board with bad news. What I felt in the gray world, looking at the assembled dead, was something larger and older and more fundamental. The fear of the small thing in the presence of the vast thing. The fear of the lit match in the dark room. The fear that is not about what might happen to you, but about what you are, which is temporary, which is fragile, which is a brief, warm flicker in an infinity of cold. You are afraid, the warden observed, not unkindly. Yes, good. The ones who are not afraid do not last as long. Fear is a form of attention, and attention is what I require. What do you want from me? He looked at me. Both faces, the young one and the old one, looked at me simultaneously, and for a moment they were the same face, and it was the face of someone who was very, very tired. The boundary must be maintained, he said, between my world and yours. It is not a wall. It is a living thing, a membrane, and it requires a living hand to tend it, a walker's hand. Without it, the membrane thins, and my world bleeds into yours, and yours into mine, and the result is, he paused, you have seen the fogs, the shapes at the windows, the music that comes at night. This is what happens when the boundary is untended. It will get worse, and you need me to tend it. I need a walker. You are the only walker I have found since Elspeth. There must be others. There are others, elsewhere, but the boundary is local. Each threshold has its own, and Ara's threshold requires an Ara walker, someone who has crossed, who has seen, who can hold both worlds in their mind at once. You have crossed, you have seen. His shifting face settled briefly into something that might have been sadness. You are what I need. And the price? I offer you knowledge, everything I know about this world, its structure, its inhabitants, its laws, everything your book lacks, everything no living scholar has ever documented, the complete truth of the gray world, given freely, held in no scholar's hand before yours. I will not pretend that this did not affect me. It struck me as a match strikes kindling, instantly, completely, with a heat that was disproportionate to the size of the spark. Everything, the complete truth of the gray world, the thing I had spent 8 years reaching toward, the thing that would make the Compendium not merely good but definitive, not merely a contribution to the field, but the foundation of it, the book that every future thanatologist would begin with, and none would surpass. And in exchange, I said, return to me at midwinter, come back to this threshold on the longest night, and take up the work. Tend the boundary, hold the membrane, for 1 year, 1 mortal year, which is nothing in my accounting, and then you may go. 1 year, 1 year, with all the knowledge I have promised, with your book complete, with the understanding you came here seeking. And what happens during that year? To me, to my body, my mind, you will be here, in the gray world. Your body will be sustained. The boundary work sustains the walker, as it sustained Elspeth. You will not age. You will not hunger. You will not die. You will simply be here, tending, walking, holding the worlds apart. Elspeth did not come back. A pause, the longest pause. The gray world was silent around us. Even the walking figures had stilled, and the vast gray sky pressed down, and the cold was a living thing, and the warden's shifting face was the only movement in a world that had stopped. Elspeth chose to stay, he said. The knowing held her. It holds some of them, the ones who love the understanding more than they love the world they left behind. He looked at me with both his faces, and both were grave. I do not compel. I have never compelled. I offer, and the walker chooses, and the choosing is the thing that matters. And if I choose not to come at midwinter, then the boundary will continue to thin. The worlds will bleed together. The living and the dead will share the same space, and the sharing will not be gentle. I stood in the gray world with my notebook in my hand, and the cold in my bones, and the offer on the table, and I did not agree, and I did not refuse. I opened my mouth to say something, a question, a clarification, another demand for specifics, because that is what I do. I ask and ask and ask until the thing has been dissected into components small enough to manage, and the gray world blurred. The parting in the veil was closing. The mortal world, which I had left behind, how long ago? Minutes, hours, was pressing back in, the color returning, the cold retreating, and the warden's face was fading, both faces dissolving into the gray like smoke into fog, and his voice came one last time, faint and everywhere. Midwinter, Clara Lennox, I will be waiting. And then I was on the ground inside the stone circle, on my knees, my notebook clutched to my chest, my spectrometric lamp guttering beside me, and the mortal world was back. The stars, the cold, the dark moor stretching away, and the boundary was closed, and the gray world was gone, and the only grey was the ordinary grey of a Scottish night in late October. Julian was standing at the edge of the stone circle. He was very still, the kind of still that means he had forgotten to breathe, and the not breathing had been going on long enough that the forgetting was no longer an accident, but a condition. His face was white, not pale, white, the white of candle wax, the white of a thing that has no blood, and his eyes were wide and dark, and full of something that I had never seen in Julian Ashworth's eyes before, and that I hope I never see again. "Clara," he said. His voice was wrong, scraped, raw, the voice of a man who has been shouting into a void for hours, and whose throat has given out. "How long?" I said. 5 hours. 5, that's not possible. I was there for 20 minutes, half an hour at most. 5 hours, Clara. I woke at 1, and you were gone. I came here at 1:30. It is now nearly 6 in the morning. He took a step toward me and stopped, as though movement required a decision he was not sure he could make. You were inside the circle. I could see you. Just a shape, a shadow, like looking at someone through frosted glass. I called your name. I called it for hours. His voice cracked on the last word, and the crack was the worst sound I have heard in my life, worse than the Warden's music, worse than the silence of the grey world, because it was the sound of Julian Ashworth's composure failing, and Julian's composure does not fail. It is the architecture of him. It is the wall that holds him up, and it was cracking. "I'm here," I said. "Julian, I'm here. I came back." He crossed the remaining distance between us in 3 strides, and took my arms, gripped them, hard, as he had on the moor when the music came, hard enough that I could feel each of his fingers pressing individually into my sleeves. And his hands were cold, ice cold, dead cold, and his face was inches from mine, and his eyes were the grey of the grey world, and the grey of the stones, and the grey of everything that is not alive. And he said, "You promised me." "I know." "You promised." "I know. I'm sorry. Don't." His grip tightened. I could feel the bones of my arms pressing together under his hands. "Don't apologize. Don't tell me you're sorry. Tell me what happened. Tell me what he said. Tell me everything." I told him. Standing in the stone circle at 6 in the morning with the first light, coming grey and cold over the eastern sea, and the moor waking around us, and his hands on my arms, and his dead face close to mine. I told him everything. The grey world, the warden, the offer, the price. I told him about the shifting face, and the voice that was the music, and the 1,000 grey figures walking on the moor. I told him about Elspeth, about the knowing that held her, about the boundary that needed tending, and the midwinter deadline, and the promise of everything I had ever wanted for my book, laid out like a feast before a starving woman. He listened. He listened with his whole body, still cold, not breathing. And when I finished, he released my arms and stepped back and turned away. And I saw his shoulders move in the way that shoulders move when a person is either laughing or doing the opposite of laughing, and does not want to be seen doing either. "Julian." 5 hours, he said, to the moor, to the stones, to the grey sky that was beginning, reluctantly, to lighten. "You were gone for 5 hours, and I stood here and called your name into something I couldn't follow you into, and I—" He stopped, breathed. The breath was deliberate, a reminder to himself, a re-engagement with the habit of living. I cannot follow you there, Clara. I am dead. I am sustained by a Grey Lord's power. If I cross a threshold that is not my own, I may not. The binding may not hold. I could unravel. I could become what I was, which is a drowned man at the bottom of a cove in Cornwall. I didn't know that. No, you didn't. Because you didn't ask. Because you went to the Standing Stones at midnight without telling me, without thinking about what it would mean for anyone other than yourself and your bloody compendium. And he turned back to face me, and his expression was the same expression he had worn in the kitchen 3 days ago, the one I had put there with my cruelty, the expression of a man who is hurt and is going to be honest about it, regardless of what honesty costs. I cannot lose someone else to the grey world. I cannot stand at another threshold and call a name that no one answers. I have done it once. I will not survive doing it again. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Who? I asked. What? Who did you lose? Before? He looked at me for a long time. The light was growing. I could see his face more clearly now. The sharp features, the grey eyes, the lines that should not be there on a face that does not age, but that are there anyway. Carved not by time, but by the thing that is worse than time, which is knowing that time has stopped for you, while it continues for everything you care about. Later, he said. I'll tell you later. I'll tell you everything, Clara. But right now, I need you to walk back to the cottage with me and sit by the fire and drink tea and be alive in a warm room, because I have spent 5 hours watching you be somewhere I could not reach, and I need. He faltered. Julian, who always has the words, who deploys language as other men deploy charm, effortlessly, extravagantly, always with one more phrase in reserve. Julian faltered. I need you to be here. We walked back. We did not speak. The dawn came up around us, grey, then silver, then a pale gold that touched the tops of the hills and the surface of the sea and the slate roofs of the village below. Gulls cried. Somewhere a sheep bleated. The world was ordinary and alive and full of color, and I had never been so grateful for color in my life. At the cottage, Julian made tea. Badly. I drank it without complaint. Bram climbed into my lap and butted his head against my chin and purred as though he were trying, by force of vibration alone, to keep me in the mortal world.